Welcome to the Worst Is Yet to Come podcast. I'm Andrew, and I'm joined by my co-host Harry.
What's up?
We're gonna roll right back into part 2 of our episode on Operation Market Garden, which is episode 7. So let's get this started.
Yep, it's gonna be a good one.
Yeah. So this is terrible. So
God, it's like right when you're like it's like right as you're like pulling out of the driveway for a long road trip, your car like just shits itself.
yeah.
Like nothing is going right.
No, this is like, if it's like a ball rolling down a hill, and it just keeps like getting speed and just getting worse and worse and worse.
God.
So the next day, the Friday, the British forces from the Guards Armored and the 43rd Wessex Infantry Division move out of Nijmegen bridgehead. So that's the previous bridgehead they took with the 82nd. Okay, and they link up with the Poles at Driel. Okay, and they want to, with the intention of crossing the Polish paratroopers across the river. Okay, so they're still trying to get these Poles across the river. Okay, but they lack suitable boats. So that means only 52 Poles are able to make it across the river to help the British. So that's not much of a relieving force for these poor guys, right?
God.
So the following day, okay, so what day are we at? We're at 1, 2,
That's
3,
52 out of like
4,
how
5,
many? Like
6.
hundreds, right? Like
Yeah, yeah. So it's pretty bad. So the Saturday, so another attempt is made at night, okay, but it was detected by the Germans to get them across, right? Okay, so although 250 Poles, mainly from the 3rd Battalion, cross the river, and only 153 make it into the 1st Airborne's perimeter. So the Brits that are still holding out are reinforced by 250, where previously the day they got 52 Poles. Okay.
jeez.
So the following day, the Sunday, a further attempt is made to reinforce the Oosterbeek perimeter, which is planned for the night. And essentially, due to a shortage of boats, the Poles crossing was canceled. So I mean, it's not
God,
going
so
very
it's like
good.
again, we're back to like these important things that need to happen. Just can now it just don't happen.
Yeah.
Like that, I just canceled it. Like, okay, well,
So part of that armored force that was rolling down the main highway is trying to still push through, and on that same day, the attack fails with very heavy casualties. So like that they're not getting anywhere close to the 1st Airborne's perimeter that's holding out still.
yeah.
So, following the failure to reinforce their position, the decision was made to withdraw the 1st Airborne back across the river the next night in Operation Berlin. So that's the following day, right? The Monday. So most people have probably seen Band of Brothers, I hope, right? So there's a part where they actually help the Brit get across the river. That's where I think it's Captain Heiliger takes over Easy Company, and he's in charge of that operation. And they help the Brits get across the river. Well, this is what's going on that Monday. So,
Yeah, was that the one where they had to use the shitty canvas sided boats? Is that
uh,
a different one?
no, that was the patrol, where it was further in the winter. That was
Okay.
further. But so the following Monday, right in Arnhem, 6,000 Allied soldiers are taken prisoner by the Germans, and another 1,000 lay dead from the fighting. So these are the guys that pretty much
God.
jumped in. The British paratroopers that jumped in. 6,000 surrender. 1,000 are dead. So this is a complete fucking shit show. So that night, Operation Berlin takes happen where the positions at Oosterbeek. So this is a little village that's kind of outside of the main bridge where the paras were at. So there was two different units. There's a group fighting at the village of Oosterbeek, and there was a group fighting at the actual bridge at Arnhem. Okay, so the group that was on Oosterbeek, they silently evacuate their positions, and the surviving paratroopers are ferried back across the river. And this is, like I was saying, is like a band of brothers whenever you see them getting across the river. So Operation Market Garden is at an end at this point. So the survivors of the 1st Airborne Division are airlifted back to England. Okay. The Poles march back 14 miles to Nijmegen, where they spend the next 10 days on guard and patrolling before they also return to England. Okay. The 82nd and 101st Airborne remains in action on the front lines in Holland to be withdrawn in the second half of November. So we see this also in Band of Brothers, right? They keep fighting once they land for a bit, and then they're pulled back by November, right before the Battle of the Bulge. So yeah, it's pretty much a big shit show. It starts off with little rough patches and it ends up being a huge shit show.
Just the God, just, I know like we mentioned it like multiple times, but just the magnitude of needing like all of that stuff to happen successfully, like like all of that stuff needs to be like pulled off like successively before the next thing can be done.
Yeah.
And if one of those things doesn't happen, it just completely falls apart. Like the dominoes start to fall. It's really crazy that they like attempted that. This is more this is more complicated than like D-Day. Like
Yeah.
D-Day was easy compared to this. I mean, it
Yes.
really is crazy that they thought it would work. I mean, I guess they're kind of riding high for D-Day still.
Yeah. So there's a lot of like, I don't know, debate on like, the actual controversies of the battle and stuff. So here's a couple bullet points we can go through if you want. So the first one is optimistic planning, right? This is way too optimistic
Yeah,
of a plan. Okay.
yeah. There should have been contingencies for, what do we do if this doesn't happen? Where do we go next if this doesn't happen? Because it really just seemed like everyone get in position and then wait for there to be reinforcements. But what happens if all of the units get bogged down, which is essentially what happens.
Yeah.
It's like there's no reinforcements. Everyone gets surrounded.
So
Or everyone has to retreat.
historian Anthony Beaver said in 2011, Market Garden was a very bad plan right from the start, right? That's the first quote that pops up, and it says, so a lot of controversy is about the plan, like I said, of taking all these bridges, like you were saying, but also the terrain was ill-suited for that XXX armor core to push up these roads, right? So, like, he ordered, all these armored units to get up these like these 2-lane roads, right? And they have to do it with like speed. Like it ain't gonna happen. Like a anti-tank gun at the front knocking out the first couple tanks stops the whole armored column, right? The
Yeah,
decision to drop the 82nd Airborne at the Groesbeck Heights, several kilometers from the 9 Mega Bridge, was questioned because it delayed them actually capturing the bridge, right? And like it was just terrible. Like they were too far back. Like it was, I don't know, it's just a lot. Like you need speed, violence of action, and if you're dropping your dudes a couple kilometers back, yeah, you got the surprise on the guys at the drop zone, but they're gonna know you got a full division marching
yeah,
towards the bridge, right?
yeah,
And like the thing with the 82nd too is they decided at a certain point that holding a salient was more important than the bridge, so they actually ended up holding some higher ground instead of holding the bridge at a certain point. So that kind of screwed up the plan, right? So like when we were saying prior to like they had to wait for the British tanks to get there to actually properly secure the bridge, it's because they're holding the high ground near the bridge instead.
Oh
So
wow.
this goes into like a failure of like leadership where like you need to know the commander's intent and then you should have like the ability to kind of think on your own feet at the time. But the commander's intent was the bridge. Securing the high ground is good. It's an important concept of war is, taking the high ground. But the
Yeah,
commander's intent was to take the bridge.
right. It's taking the high ground is good if you're on the defensive, but you're not. You're on the offensive. You need to take the fucking bridge.
Yeah, and I mean, like I said, they had to wait till the British armor got up to them.
Yeah.
The next kind of, controversy, it says the weather, but I mean, like, you can't really control the weather. I mean, you know, it's like I said, it delayed the polls dropping in, but like you have to have contingencies, like you said, in case things happen, and that clearly wasn't there, right?
Like I know they like push back like we're talking about like weather. Like I know we push back. They push back like D-Day like what 2 or 3 days something like that. Like when it came down
Yeah,
to it. But even when they ended up going, like the weather was still shitty.
yeah. I
so
mean,
so
like,
how shitty was it to like just not be like just go. But, but
Yeah.
then again, you got to think like, I mean, too much rain. You know what? It's the Netherlands, right? So it's going to be a fucking swamp. It
Uh,
already is a swamp,
yeah, I know.
and then that
Um,
whole area.
so the next point is priority of the operation, right? So several weeks prior to taking shape, Operation Market Garden, right? The British actually captured Antwerp, which is an important port,
Yeah,
and this had great potential to like shorten their supply lines. Okay, but in September, the peninsula could have been sealed by a short advance, only 24 kilometers past Market Garden. I mean, past Antwerp, but instead the priority of the supplies went from that little short advance that to saving up for Market Garden, right? So at that time, you know, the priority, you need to shorten your supply lines, right? Like you win war with battles, but you actually win war with like managing supplies, like straight up. Like you can win battles, but if you're not like strategically like prepared, you're gonna lose the war. Doesn't matter. It happens in history.
absolutely. Yeah,
Like it's straight up. Like Napoleon in Russia, supplies. You know, Rommel in North Africa, supplies. So like,
yeah.
it,
Any example where the army pushes past their supply lines, it's like an army marches on its stomach. If they don't have food, they're not going to go anywhere. Like,
yeah, bullets, beans, and bandages, right?
yeah, they're like it's not. Yeah, like there's nothing you can do. Like even if your men want to, which as soon as you can't feed them, their desire to do anything is going to go. It's going to drop real fast.
So, like I was saying, so like it's one of the controversies. Like, was it really worth this operation when we could have pushed the First Canadian Army 24 kilometers past Antwerp and fully secured the port, and that would have shortened the supply lines? Like, it's one of those things where like another law of combat is like prioritize and execute. Was that really priority to push these supplies for this operation that was risky and too complicated, or was it better for the much simple plan to shorten your supply lines? And they chose the more complicated plan. So yeah. So it paused the advance, at Antwerp, and then the big battle of Scheldt that the Canadians fought. So like it's controversial because there could have been better use of supplies. Like I said, there's missed opportunities. That's another big important point. Is the Arnhem Bridge was not the only Rhine crossing. Archegard planners kind of realized that there was a ferry available at Dryl, and the British could have secured that instead of the Arnhem Bridge. Kind of stuff like that. The attack to the attack into Arnhem was intended to capture the rail bridge, pontoon bridge, and road bridge, and that rail bridge was blown right in front of Colonel Frost, Second Parachute Battalion. The pontoon bridge was disabled by removing of the sections. It only left the highway bridge intact, and it was just a complete shit show, right? So there's a lot of things that kind of went wrong. So you know the risky planning that required like a willingness to gamble at the tactical and operational levels didn't work out for them. And like it's terrible. Like I said, also the intelligence failure was an important thing, not knowing that many German units were in the area. So it's
Yeah,
just like it just
yeah,
goes on and on and on and on. So
yeah. I think there's a point in the Bridge Too Far movie, right where the intelligence guys are saying like you can see like the tanks and shit in the woods, right? I
yeah,
think that's yeah, right. Like, and they're like, you can't say that it's that. You know what I mean? Like, we can't
yeah,
stop the entire operation because of this one little thing. It's like if you just like paid attention, like to little shit like that, like uh, like like you were saying, like there was too much writing on stuff that wasn't concrete. You know what I mean?
yeah.
And see it ended badly.
Yeah. So going back to someone we actually keep talking about a lot is Colonel John Frost. So he's actually become like a legend, I guess, in the British Para Regiment. So like he's kind of highlighted a lot because of his like leadership qualities. and how much his men loved him. So like in action, he was a tough leader. He had a clear head in battle, and he won the respect of every paratrooper in his battalion. Quote is he didn't mix his words and seemed to be injected, and he seemed to inject confidence in everyone. Even if you didn't like what he was saying, we would have followed him anywhere. So this kind of goes back to like our first big episode about Stonewall Jackson is like men want to follow like an example, like a prime example of like what you should be. So like he's got a clear head in battle that mirrors Stonewall Jackson, He instills confidence in his men. Even if you didn't like what he said, his men would have followed him anywhere. Like this is the kind of guy that you need leading men in combat. He even was wounded in his foot during this whole action. And do you think that stopped him? Absolutely not. He was there for a 4-day battle. Okay. They're running artillery fire down on his paratroopers. They're sending tanks and infantry. It was intense fighting with little mercy shown. And they refused to surrender after German counterattack after counterattack. Like, this is like, I don't know, just great leadership, great soldiering. Like, I don't know if you got anything to add to that, but like, the guy's a legend. There's a reason why people talk about him today.
Yeah. And like going back to what you're saying, the plan where he was supposed to, it was the Arnhem Bridge, right? Like, I'm sorry, they marched into Arnhem to take the bridge, and if it had gone to plan, there was supposed to have been 9,000 men almost, um, like defending the bridge for like 2 days or something, and it ended up being like under 1,000 that he was commanding.
Yeah, because
Like
his
just
battalion got
insane.
cut off. Yeah,
Yeah, just insane. The fact that he was able to hold it off, hold off a Panzer Corps, like just with those men, like that's insane. Like, and again, it's going back to the beginning of the episode where we were saying they're paratroops. They're lightly armored. They don't have everything that like even normal infantry would go into combat with. They're essentially light infantry.
yeah.
Parachuting into these areas, so they don't have everything they need. That's why to paratroopers that supplies are so necessary. You know what I mean? That's why you don't want to drop them too far beyond, or you don't want to drop them in an area where you might not be able to get supplies. In this situation, that's like exactly what they did. They dropped paratroopers too far into an area, and then they couldn't get supplies into that area.
I think an important thing is like why they held on for so long is like the paras are like an elite unit. They're like a notch above the rest of the British Army, and they still
Yeah.
are. And they're like just hardcore dudes that love doing hardcore shit, and it makes them happy. And that kind of like toughness is just like it makes them like a more elite troop, and they're gonna be willing to do these kind of things.
Right. Like it's like uh could you imagine like how insane it is to like do skydiving?
Yeah.
Right. And then now imagine if you were a soldier who was going into combat. You're going to be shot at. You're going to shoot at people, and you have to jump out of a fucking plane to get there.
And most of the time, the
That's
casualty rates
insane.
expected for paratroopers is like
Yeah.
stupidly high.
Yeah. Like on top of all of that, sometimes unfortunately it happened, but your fucking chute just might not open.
Yeah.
It fucking happened. You know what I mean? Like on top of all that shit, something like that, it did happen. But like the fact that it's like, imagine how from like just trying to think of it from like a realistic standpoint. Like think of like how insane it is to like go skydiving, and then think of like the fact of like how insane it is to like, join the military, like go into like active duty and like be in combat. But then it's like you have to willingly go into combat. You're gonna fight, and you have to jump out of a fucking plane to get there. Usually in the dark. Like it's insane. But like because of guys like that, that's why the Allies won the war. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Going back to Colonel Frost there. there's two things. So we keep going back to the movie Bridge Too Far because it's just an awesome movie. But
So
there's
good. If anyone hasn't seen it, watch it.
yeah, we're gonna cover it. But
But
there's a
yeah,
scene where Colonel Frost is like running across the road and the enemies are shooting at him. So in that movie, he's played by Anthony Hopkins. Now the real Colonel Frost was there for that movie being filmed, just kind of to be an advisor, just kind of see what's going on.
yeah,
And he pulled Anthony Hopkins aside, and he was like, British officers don't run in front of their men or the enemy under the face of fire. So like Hopkins had to like reshoot the scene where he was like strolling across the road, a bullets flinging past him, and it just goes back to what we've talked about like before, like the Napoleonic War kind of era. It's like a British officer, a true leader, does not like
yeah,
cower in the presence of the enemy, in front of his men or the
yeah.
enemy. So like this fucking guy straight up was like, yeah, I ain't running in front of my men or the enemy. And it's like that's fucking balls of steel, man.
God.
It's respectable. And the last point I have about him is the actual bridge they're fighting over was renamed in 1978 to the John Frost Bridge, and
No
he
shit.
was reluctant to have that change. He didn't want to change named after him, but they did anyways. And that kind of goes back to good leadership quality about being humble, where like he straight up was like, no, I don't want this named after me, but they did it anyways.
Yeah,
And it's just important quality of like a good man and leader.
that's cool as fuck.
I think he really embodies like good quality leadership. And there's a lot of lessons around him, and a lot of. I mean, this guy saw a lot of action prior to this, so
Yeah, he fought
insane.
in like North Africa and
Yes,
Italy.
in Sicily. Yeah, so like
He was one of the
he's
first guys to like. He was one of the first guys that joined the parachute regiment.
yeah, so like these
Insane.
yeah, exceptional leader, exceptional leader. So we want to roll into the next important figure we want to talk. We kind of just like a lot of our podcasts, and something that we really want to keep going to is like kind of just showing the individual soldier on their level and some of the crazy things they did. Same thing we did the 9/11 episode where we just picked a couple people and talked about them. It's the human experience through these things that kind of helps us understand more.
Yeah.
So the next person we have is Major Robert Henry Kane. And the interesting thing where I learned about him was this is Jeremy Clarkson from Top Gear. This is his ex-father-in-law, and he did a
Oh wow.
BBC special about him. And so he was essentially awarded the Victoria Cross. So I'll kind of want to read off his decoration note, right? So War Office, 2nd November 1944. The King has been graciously pleased to approve the award of the Victoria Cross to Captain, temporary Major, Robert Henry Kane of the Royal Northumbrian Fusiliers. Okay. In Holland on the 19th of September 1944, Major Kane was commanding a rifle company of the South Staffordshire Regiment during the Battle of Arnhem. When his company was cut off from the rest of the battalion during the next 6 days, was closely engaged with enemy tanks, self-propelled guns, and infantry. The Germans made repeated attempts to break into the company positions by infiltrating, and they succeeded in doing so. The whole situation, the airborne troops would have been jeopardized. Major Kane, with his outstanding devotion to duty and remarkable powers and leadership, was able to extend his personal responsibility for saving this vital sector from falling into enemy hands. On the 20th of September, a Tiger tank approached the area, held up his company, and Major Kane went out alone to deal with it armed with a Piat, taking up a position he held his fire until the tank was only 20 yards in front of him, and then he opened it up with the Piat. The tank immediately halted, turned its gun on him, shot away a corner of the house near where the officer was lying. Although wounded by machine gun bullets had fallen masonry, Major Kane continued to fire until he scored several direct hits, immobilizing the tank, and supervised the bringing up of a 75mm gun, which completely destroyed the tank. Only then he consented to have his own wounds dressed. The next morning, this officer drove off 3 more tanks by the fearless use of his Piat, on each occasion leaving cover, taking up positions in open ground with complete disregard for personal safety. During the next following days, Major Kane was everywhere the danger was threatening, moving among his men and encouraging them by his fearless example to hold out. He refused rest and medical attention in spite of the fact that his hearing had been seriously impaired from a perforated eardrum and he was suffering from multiple wounds. On September 25th, the enemy made a concentrated attack on Major Kane's position using self-propelled guns, flamethrowers, and infantry, and by this time, the last Piat had been put out of action, and Major Kane was only armed with a 2-inch light mortar. However, by skillful use of this weapon and his daring leadership of a few men still under his command, he completely demoralized the enemy after an engagement lasted more than 3 hours, and then they withdrew in disorder. Throughout the whole course of the Battle of Arnhem, Major Kane showed superb gallantry. His powers of endurance and leadership were the admiration of his fellow officers, and the stories of his valor have been constantly exchanged among the troops. His coolness and courage under fire could not be surpassed. So, like, I don't know where you want to break down this thing, but like,
just that's insane. Like he was like going out in like open, like uncovered from like machine gun fire and shit, and like the tank is like, I guess, maneuvering its gun to hit him, and he's just aiming at it with a Piat. Like,
so yeah, essentially the first. I mean, there's a lot to break down, but the first interaction is a Tiger tank, and he waits till he gets 20 yards away from him, and he opens up with it, and the tank sees him, shoots the gun at the house near him. Okay, so he's wounded by fallen masonry. Like, stones are fucking heavy. He's wounded by machine gun bullets. Okay, and he continues to fire until he immobilizes the tank. Okay, those Piats are like spring-loaded, kind of like you need to be close. Okay.
Yeah, they're like recoilless rifles. Like, yeah, just like it shoots out with a spring, like you're saying. Like it just bounces, it like bounces out of the tube.
So like
it's not accurate. Like
this goes back to our conversation with like Bruce about like the Victoria Cross, about like you have to knowingly volunteer to do something crazy, be under enemy fire, most likely get wounded or die. And like it's insane. Like he goes up by himself, knocks out a tank, gets wounded by machine gun fire. The next morning he drives off 3 more tanks with the Piat. Exposing himself by leaving cover, going into open ground, like disregarding his safety. Now, once again, like the leadership lessons from this man. Don't ask your men to do something you wouldn't do yourself. He's leading by example. He's inspiring his men that like, if I could do it, you could do it. Like,
absolutely,
it's unreal. I'm like, taking out, this one tank and pushing off tanks. He's like, anytime there was any action going on, he moved that sector. Presence to his men to show that, like, hey guys, I'm here with you. I'm here to see what's going on. We could do this, okay?
Yeah.
He fucking moves from position to position, being with his men. He's like encouraging them by his fearless example, right? He refuses medical attention, refuses to sleep. Like, it's fucking unreal. These guys are fucking superhuman.
Yeah, dude.
Straight up.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is like I said, perfect example of what a leader is.
Yeah.
Deserving of Victoria Cross.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I bet any money when he was awarded it, he was humbly accepting it on behalf of his men.
Yeah, hell yeah. So who we got next?
We got Private First Class Joe Mann. I don't know if you want to go over that, Harry. This is an American. He's one of yours.
God.
You want to read off his Medal of Honor citation?
Yeah, I'm getting it. All right, so so this is his Medal of Honor citation. So he distinguished himself by conspicuous gallantry above and beyond the call of duty. On 18th of September 1944, in the vicinity of Best, Holland, his platoon, attempting to seize the bridge across the Wilhelmina Canal, was surrounded and isolated by an enemy force greatly superior in personnel and firepower. Acting as a lead scout, PFC man boldly crept crept to within rocket launcher range of an enemy artillery position, and in the face of heavy enemy fire, destroyed an 88 millimeter gun and an ammunition dump. Completely disregarding the great danger involved, he remained in his position and with his M1 rifle, killed the enemy one by one until he was wounded 4 times. Taken to a covered position, he insisted on returning to a forward position to stand guard during the night. On the following morning, the enemy launched a concerted attack and advanced to within a few yards of the position, throwing hand grenades as they approached. One of these landed within a few feet of PFC Joe E. Mann. Unable to raise his arms, which were bandaged to his body, he yelled "grenade" and threw his body over the grenade, and as it exploded, died. His outstanding gallantry above and beyond the call of duty and his magnificent conduct were an everlasting inspiration to his comrades for whom he gave his life. So it's a guy that he got wounded the day before, refused to, stay back in the, field hospital or wherever, volunteered for like guard duty, and then like was on guard duty, when the enemy attacked. During the enemy attack, the enemy's lobbing grenades and he can't, do anything. So his first instinct is to yell "grenade" to warn his, fellow soldiers around him. And then his next instinct is to jump on that grenade to prevent their own deaths. So just like you were saying, like just above and beyond like what, normal people kind of think of, what I mean? Just that ultimate like act of complete selflessness. He was not thinking of himself. He was only thinking about the men around him.
Yeah, and and kind of circling back to a constant theme I want to keep bringing through the podcast is like our theme of like Christianity, right? So this kind of reminds me of John 15:13, right? Greater love have no one than this, to lay down their life for one's friends. So like this is like the definition of like, these are the guys you're training with for the last couple of years. You get in the combat with these guys and you straight up just jump on a grenade to save them. Like the bond between men in like combat is undescribable. I mean, we never experienced it, like we can't comprehend it. But like these guys are like willing to die for each other. Like most instances when you talk to like veterans or any kind of veteran or someone who lived through this kind of thing, is they're more worried about their buddies than themselves. And this is like an important lesson that like to kind of love one each other, as Jesus loved us, and he gave up his life for us, and like he wants us to do the same for other people. Love is not cheap. It's not a shallow sentiment. It's costly. And when we do things for other people this way, it shows like what true love is, and sacrifice. It's real deep, man. Like it's like laying it all on the line for your buddies.
Fuck yeah.
So I mean that's pretty much all we got in our notes so far. I mean, is anything?
Yeah, we like to whenever we talk about the battles, like that kind of stuff, we like to go over like the figures, the numbers.
Yeah.
Of the total battle. So hang on one second. Okay, right. So Market Garden lasted, it took place from September 17th to September 27th of 1944. And it was fought on the Allied side. There was 3 divisions and an independent brigade, which comprised 41,628 troops and 3,600 Allied aircraft. And the Germans had 100,000 men. The killed, wounded, and captured on the Allied side is between 15 and 17,000, including 88 tanks destroyed, 377 aircraft and gliders lost. And on the German side, it was killed and wounded between 6,000 and 13,000. So just like the disparity in the forces in size, but also in loss. So like out of 41,000, 15 to 17,000 were killed, wounded, or captured.
That's what, like
Uh, It's a
almost
third.
half,
It's
a
all
third.
half
Yeah,
almost. Yeah, it's
yeah,
half. It's
a
over.
third,
It's
almost half.
over. It's over a third. That's half almost.
Yeah,
And the out of 100,000 on the German side, 6 to like 13,000 were killed or wounded. So just and that's 6%, 13%, whatever it is, compared to like 40-45%. That's insane. It's just like that number kind of really does show like how like how badly the operation failed. I mean, to think that they could accomplish, what they wanted to get done with, 40,000 men against 100,000. Like it's especially like going in on the offensive like that.
yeah,
It seems kind of really dumb, in hindsight. And I think maybe part of it was, riding on, the high of D-Day probably. I mean, the morale across the Allied forces is up. You know what I mean?
yeah. So I mean, both Churchill and Montgomery claim that the operation was like a 90% successful, although Montgomery pretty much
God.
accepted responsibility, but he kind of blames lack of support, and he refers to the Battle of the Scheldt, which was undertaken by Canadian troops not involved in Market Garden. And he said, it was a bad mistake on my part. I underestimated the difficulty of opening up the approaches to Antwerp. I I reckon the Canadian Army could do it while we were going for the Ruhr. I was wrong. In my prejudiced view, if the operation had been properly backed from its inception and given the aircraft, ground forces, and administrative resources necessary for the job, it would have been successful in spite of my mistakes or the adverse weather or the presence of the 2nd SS Panzer Corps in the Arnhem area. I remain Market Garden's unrepentant advocate. So,
Yeah.
like, I don't know, man. Like, we could do breakdown about Montgomery, but I mean, he accepted responsibility, yet he kind of still blamed things, which is like kind of poor leadership. And he catches a lot of shit for it. And then when I tell people I'm related to him because he's my grandma's second cousin, I get shit for for what he did somehow from people in the historical realm. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it just goes back to, I think a good leader or a leader, whether they're good or not, would recognize that.
Oh, extreme ownership. Like,
Yeah,
it falls
owner.
on you.
Yeah, if regardless of if it was your fault or not,
Yeah.
take ownership of it, own that. And because I mean, at the end of the day, like you can say like what you want, like it's the same kind of thing with like any kind of situation. It's like unless you're there on the ground, you can't know. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And with every like, what are you gonna do? Like look at the soldiers, in like the First Airborne Division. You know what I mean? Or 82nd or 101st or the like 30th
Polish.
Corps. Are
Yeah.
you gonna look? Yeah, or the first independent parachute brigade, like the Polish guys. Like, what are you gonna look them in the face and say like, "Oh, you guys did a bad job"?
Yeah.
No, you're gonna say like, "Thank you for trying."
Yeah.
It was not your fault.
Well, that's the thing too. Like his cockiness. Yeah, it's kind of like, yeah, he should take like ownership of the situation, but he also turned it to like, yeah, you guys did a good job and we did
Yeah,
90% of it. So that still holds morale.
yeah, like
Yeah, I never thought
yeah,
of it that way.
and that going to like being a good officer. He owned it, and not only did he own it, he was like you're saying the confidence. To be a good officer, you got to have charisma.
Oh yeah.
If you aren't convincing, if you aren't 100% sure, you have to convince them. You know what I'm saying? You have to convince yourself, and you have to convince your men. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you're not confident, or if you don't appear confident, then they're going to see right through that.
Yeah.
And he owned it, and I mean, I think, despite it being a failure or not, I think he's a good leader because he owned it and because
Yeah.
he didn't, as far as I know, he didn't like, shit on anyone or, you know what I mean? He didn't
Yeah.
like, oh, it was his fault. You know what I mean? He tried to like,
Like he just
dump it on anyone else.
well, he
You know
just
what I mean?
kind
He
of
was just
blanketly said if we had better support and the weather was better, it would have been fine. So
yeah. I mean, like even that kind of thing. Like you can't blame the support on any one person. You know what I'm saying? I mean,
yeah,
he might have been like throwing a slide at Churchill or Eisenhower. I don't know, but he did like when it came down to it, he could have said like after he was like out of the army and everything, he could have said, "Oh, it was Churchill's fault," or "Oh, it was Eisenhower's fault. They didn't give me the support I needed." You know what I mean? But
well,
he didn't. He owned it. You know?
the funny thing about Montgomery is he was one of the first generals as soon as the war was done to write his memoir. So like his bias would be out right away, and it would set the precedent for like
Yeah, yeah. Anything anyone else says after that is going to seem like they're just trying to.
contradict what he said. Yeah,
Yeah,
so yeah, so
yeah,
he was really in the thing too. Patton was also working on his memoirs right before he died too, because he wanted to do the same thing. He wanted to get his point of view out right
yeah. He
away.
wanted to. Yeah, he wanted to get his point across before anyone else could say anything. You know, and you know maybe that's going to the point of like you know you could argue like oh were they trying to like you know cover their ass you know what I mean like you know maybe but
Yeah,
at the end of the day I think you know 9/10 of the men who fought under Montgomery and Patton would be like no I would have died for that guy
well, that's the thing too.
you know
Yeah,
what I mean
a lot of people give Patton flack and Montgomery flack, but you're looking at it through like what 70, 80 years away. Like they said, the men
yeah
that like fought under these guys were like behind them 100% because nine
yeah
times out of 10 these guys were winners. Men want to follow winners. Men want to be
yeah
winners.
yeah
Like we
yeah
said before. Like
yeah and like we can like look at history like we can look at anything throughout history with you know, rose tinted glasses with our like modern sensibilities and everything like that, our
yeah,
modern expectations. And you know, just it's not going to work. You know, it's not going to mesh because it was just different back then.
yeah,
But I really do think you know 9 out of 10 of the men that served under both of them would have been like, no, you know, and like, did they do things that you know were not you know the best? Obviously, but most of the time it was like you know, I think that you could argue that like Montgomery and like Patton were like it was like a soldier's soldier. You know what I mean?
yeah,
They understood, you know, the guy on the ground. You know what I mean? And they knew what it took to lead those guys and to get them to do what you know normal people don't want to do. You know, so I
yeah,
think at the end of the day, like whether it was you know blame or no blame, whatever, I think it he was a good leader and you know, obviously, if Market Garden had gone a different way, the war probably would have been over quicker. You know what I mean?
yeah,
But it just didn't happen that way. It just wasn't meant to.
yeah. I mean, I'm just looking at a book that I have right here. It's Montgomery Lessons in Leadership from a Soldier's General. And essentially, from the little cliff notes, it literally says his men loved him and they were fiercely loyal to him. So, like, what does that say about a man as a leader?
Right? Yeah. Could you?
You got
Yeah. As a leader.
you got to be doing something right if your men are that fiercely loyal to you. And like,
Yeah.
you could think throughout history of like the greatest leaders have the most loyal men to them, and
Yep.
that's
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Going back to like Caesar. You know what I mean? Like, why was Caesar able to like gain
March his
control?
men across the
Right.
Rubicon.
Because they'd fought with him for like 20 years. Like,
Why was Alexander the Great able to conquer the known world? Because his
right.
men followed him past the known world into
Yep.
the unknown.
Literally. Yep.
He
100%.
said, why was Stonewall Jackson able to march his men hundreds of kilometers? Because they're fiercely loyal to him. Like that's just the mark of a good leader.
Hell
And
yeah.
that's pretty much all I think we have to say on the subject. I want to thank everyone who's been listening, especially our friends and family who are predominantly our listeners, and the new people that have been coming around. Especially all the people that started liking our Facebook page, our Instagram page. Really appreciate it. We're still, working on this, working out the rough patches. So we're going to be trying to get more consistent with these episodes. And yeah, hopefully we'll break down Bridge Too Far, maybe, possibly soon. It's a great movie. We have loads of ideas on the burner right now, and if any listeners have any idea suggestions, feel free to drop us an email or Facebook message or anything. And that's pretty much it, buddy.
Yeah, and just because it's a tradition at this point, we need to fire up that Plains of Abraham episode. We've mentioned it, I think, in every episode we've done, or
Yeah,
the last 3 or 4. So
yeah. So we'll get
gotta
around to
make
the
it a
Plains of
tradition.
Abraham.
Just gotta make it a tradition at this point to mention it.
I have the outline made. It's just we need to do it.
Yeah.
So
So
yeah.
we'll get that. Hopefully that one will be the next one.
Yeah, we kind of want to jump around though on different subjects. We don't want to focus just on World War II. Don't want to focus just on Canadian history. Don't want to focus just on the Civil War. So it's us trying to balance things that we're interested in and diversity for the people that are listening.
Yeah, but if anyone has any suggestions, hit us up on our Facebook page or Instagram page and let us know.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for listening, guys, and have a good rest of your day.
Sounds good. See you next time.